Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Georgia Tech stuns Florida State in Ireland. I think a lot of the Florida State listeners know we were very high on this team heading into 2024, but I think more importantly, we were really high on this Florida State team, particularly in this matchup where you have a Georgia Tech defense that was brutal, stopping the run last year. You take a look up at the box score. Georgia Tech outrushed Florida State by almost 100 yards. A couple things went wrong I want to get into. I think for the Florida State fans, it's a 12-team playoff. You can still go win the ACC. The season is still in front of you, and we knew there would be some growing pains with this Florida State team. You don't just magically kind of snap your fingers and replace all the NFL talent that they had to replace. As Michigan fans, we kind of feel the same way heading into 2024. So I think it gets better. But want to talk about the things that need to get better for this Florida State program going forward. And Dill, I think where you want to start is on the defensive side of the football. We talked for a large portion of this offseason about the question marks that Florida State had at linebacker, particularly with the experience, right? You lose guys like Tatum Bethune that has played so much football, were consistently in the right spots, fitting the run the right way. You got to give a lot of credit to Georgia Tech. I think Buster Faulkner called a phenomenal game as the offensive coordinator for Georgia Tech, but you look at the Florida State linebackers, they, for lack of better terms, just looked lost all game.
And you knew that Georgia Tech was going to put a lot of pressure on them. I mean, that is an offense that it kind of makes your linebackers play really good because Haynes King can carry the ball, their running backs can carry the ball, and frankly, their wide receivers can carry the ball. So everyone can touch it, run it really effectively. And I think you're right. You kind of notice when you don't have a couple of guys, I mean, really two guys, because there were some moments DJ Lundy played decent football in that game, but by and large, really, I think disappointing game for him in terms like we kind of talked about it. He was going to need to step up to the plate and be big time, be really, really consistent. Now, he didn't play particularly good, but they really need to find someone to play next to him because I don't think I saw any linebackers.
Yeah, a guy like Omar Graham who played a lot, and we don't drag players, we don't make a habit of doing that, but Omar Graham probably shouldn't have been playing as much as he was playing for that Florida State defense. And you look at DJ Lundy, we kind of said this one during the offseason too. DJ Lundy is a box linebacker, right? He wants to play between the tackles, and Georgia Tech did a brilliant job getting this Florida State team to the perimeter and getting them in space. And again, these linebackers, and I would throw in Devontae Brown at the safety position, just not coming downhill and not making plays, especially in space, but just not fitting the run exactly the right way. I think another thing that was mildly frustrating is I don't think Georgia Tech would have consistently thrown the football in this Florida State secondary, especially on the boundary. I wish Florida State would have been putting some more bodies in the box to stop Georgia Tech running the football, because that's where your matchups are. We kind of talked about it heading in. If Haynes King and these wide receivers beat your all ACC cornerbacks and AZ Thomas and Fentrell Cypress, you could live with that. But really just struggling to stop the run. I'm going to pull up the number here. Georgia Tech giving up 190 rushing yards, 5.3 yards per carry, just letting Georgia Tech consistently go down on those 8-minute plus drives and kind of just die by 1,000 needles. That was something frustrating for me as well.
And it was, I mean, they were trying, looked like they were trying to roll Shaheem Brown into the box, but at the end of the day, it's like, you got to make plays. You got to tackle. They weren't tackling particularly well. And you're right. Nobody was fitting runs particularly consistently at all, but also just giving up a lot of yards, like after contact. I mean, how many times are piles being pushed in the wrong way? And just, again, almost like what, like, you gotta want it. You gotta want
it. Those yards matter. You know what I mean? Like a 2nd and 8 versus 2nd and 6 with the Georgia Tech team that wants to run the football and stay on schedule on offense. Those type of plays matter. And Florida State gave up far too many of those kind of plays, those hidden yards, if you will, on the defensive side of the football. And I think one other thing Georgia Tech did a really nice job of is just keeping these edge rushers out of the football game. I mean, a lot of the hype, a lot of the belief that we had with Florida State heading into 2024 is you have some elite edge rushers. And Marvin Jones Jr. on a couple of occasions had some really nice pass rushes, but Georgia Tech was doing a lot of read option, getting Haynes King out of the pocket. It was very tough for your best players on defense, Patrick Payton and a guy like Marvin Jones, to really impact this football game. We didn't really hear their name get called pretty much at all during the broadcast.
And I think last thing for me is be remiss to say that they're not missing a guy like Braden Fisk, because they were not making a ton of things happen from the inside, and they were giving up a lot of push. There were a lot of room to run in that middle. Again, I think some of those things that like you knew, I think you knew that they had to replace, and you wanted to believe that there were going to be the guy like Josh Farmer, would he step up? Would a Daryl Jackson step up and make it happen? Daniel Lyons had a couple moments, but there was just nothing consistent.
Daniel Lyons didn't play enough. Sorry to interrupt you. I thought Daniel Lyons was probably the best interior defensive lineman, a guy that was getting rave reviews coming out of fall camp. I didn't think he played enough, and I think you're right. I mean, the best friend for a linebacker, especially young, inexperienced linebackers, are having defensive linemen in front of you that can win at the point of attack. Florida State missed Braden Fisk and Fabian Lovett in a very big way. And Georgia Tech, you got to give Georgia Tech credit. That offensive line is legit. They returned, 4 out of 5 starters, over 120 starts to that offensive line. It was a good unit, but you wanted to see a little bit more impact from guys like Josh Farmer and Daryl Jackson on the inside.
They're also just making some situational plays. I don't even when you needed a big moment. I mean, Georgia Tech even gave him a couple, and you're not going to pick a fumble up because you want to go try to take it to the house. It's like, again, those plays are that 3rd and 18 at the end of the game. You give up 12 plays on a screen. It's just, this is like really, really frustrating.
You go back to 2023, Florida State made those kind of plays to win football games. It just felt like at times Florida State didn't make those plays to win. Now, flipping over to the offensive side of the football, Dill, a ton of noise around DJU at the quarterback spot. Look, I'm not going to get up here and say that DJU was elite for Florida State this afternoon. I don't think everyone just wants to bag on the kid on Twitter. Look, Florida State, especially when they started to throw the football, I thought in the second half, when it got a little bit drier, you saw some nice things from that passing attack. I think the biggest storyline, though, is the rushing attack, and particularly kind of how it went after the first 2 drives, where you got to give Mike Norvell and that offensive staff a ton of credit. They scripted up some beautiful first couple of drives, specifically kind of what we talked about heading into the game, getting the football to the perimeter, testing some of those linebackers in space. Jalen Lucas looked to be a difference maker for this Florida State offense. I don't think he had a single touch in the second half. It seemed like some things that were working for Florida State early, to me, it just seemed like they stopped going to them in the second half, which kind of made me scratch my head. And again, I'm not going to get up here and question Mike Norvell on the offensive side of the football. The guy's way smarter than me, but it did seem like things that worked for Florida State early, they didn't really go to after that first quarter.
Yeah, I was really surprised to see that they didn't work in any screens, didn't work those pop passes, and some of those things are working, and I think opening some things up in the middle. And I just don't think Florida State's offensive line is like that unit that you're just going to line them up. If teams know they're going to run the ball inside, that Florida State offensive line is just not built to they're not Georgia's offensive line. They're not like a peak Alabama offensive line right now. So to go to that very predictable kind of run on first down, run on second down, throw on third down, it did feel like they got to that a little bit after the first couple of drives, and in the offense did stagnate a little bit.
I wish Florida State went to throwing the football and pushing the football down the field a little bit more, because you look at Georgia Tech, they just started rolling 7-8 man boxes. And I don't even know, there's not many offensive lines in the country that are able to run in that kind of box, regardless of how good you are, right? When Georgia Tech said, hey, we're just not going to let Florida State, kind of something I wish Florida State did, quite frankly, on defense too. And Georgia Tech, after the first quarter, said, hey, we're not just going to let Florida State just run the football here. So we're going to put 7-8 man boxes. And it just took a really long time for Florida State to say, hey, we're going to start trying to trust our wide receivers on the outside, where, you saw Ja'Kai Douglas, who I think is going to be a guy for Florida State the rest of the year. You saw Malik Benson, Kentron Porte kind of come up and make some plays.
Once they went to it, they started getting, they were getting to it. And DJU was throwing the ball on time, accurately doing his thing. I'm kind of with you. It was almost frustrating, when I saw that stat about the air yards. And I think that's what was really provoking the Twitter sphere, if you will, to go after DJU. But it's not his fault if they're calling everything behind the line of scrimmage.
He was 11 of 12.
Why didn't they get to something down the line or downfield, I should say?
And
because it was kind of working once they went to it a little bit.
And guess what? I don't give a dang what his air yards are if he's 11 of 12 being extremely efficient and we're moving the football. Bo Nix on Oregon, which had a top 3 offense in the country last year's air yards were 6.5 yards down the field. It was one of the lowest in the country. I don't care how the air yards are if the offense is moving the football. So, yeah, people on Twitter kind of clowning that. I don't necessarily know if I agree with that. And outside of that, it didn't go the way you kind of wanted it to go if you were Florida State. You know what I mean? I think Florida State's path to victory was, we're going to run the football on a Georgia Tech defense. You got to give Tyler Santucci, the defensive coordinator for Georgia Tech, that team looked like a different team. The run were exceptional. The communication was exceptional. No busting coverage. So they did a really good job. But
in the depth in their D line stood tall. I mean, they obviously they started stopping the run a little bit more effectively almost until as the game went on.
Yep. It just didn't. I mean, the path and how Florida State wanted that game to look was how it went in the first quarter, where we're running the football, we're controlling the time of possession. And it didn't help that Florida State's defense didn't really do their job. You didn't play much complementary defense where if you're Florida State, you want to run the football, get to the depth of Georgia Tech. But at the same time, Florida State's giving up 8-9 minute drives in the second quarter that just take the football out of your offense's hands. I think Florida State punted twice, and they were moving the football. Mike Norvell said it on the broadcast. Like, Florida State was moving the football. I almost had over 300 yards. I think they had over 300 yards of total offense. You just didn't really play the money downs in the big plays. You didn't make the big plays, and that's kind of how you lose by 3 on a last-second field goal. We'll close it out there. Again, for Florida State, it's like everything is still in front of you, and you kind of trust that Mike Norvell is going to get this team kind of going again. But obviously, a disappointing start to open up the 2024 season. We'll close it out there again. Florida State fans, that y'all have showed a ton of support to us all offseason. Hey, I was on Florida State 10.5. Like, I'm right. It hurts, but appreciate you guys rocking, and we'll talk to y'all later.